Hey, what is going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to do a full controller settings guide for Project Nova, which is going to cover sensitivity and exponential versus linear. We'll cover a few key control options, and then we'll cover your binds. Now, this does differ from EZFN in a few notable ways. One, L2 is much stronger on Nova than EZFN. Two, you have access to an edit mode sensitivity. And three, you also have access to the linear settings. So there's quite a few differences in how I'd recommend you set up your controller on EZFN against Nova. Let's start out with exponential versus linear. On the modern aim assist, I'd say both are viable options, but probably linear is a bit better because that aim assist naturally favors close range engagements. It's still quite decent at close range, but the strength at long range is pretty poor. So linear kind of synergizes nicely because linear works better at close range than long range, and it also gives you a decent boost to your mechanics. So linear makes a lot of sense of that aim assist. With legacy settings though, I don't think it's quite as clear cut because legacy, let's be honest, is pretty bad at close range. The hipfire aim assist is still there, but it's weak compared to the modern aim assist. However, at long range with L2, it's incredibly powerful. If you know how to use legacy correctly, it's basically guaranteed hits with the AR at long range. The problem is you have to aim while hip firing with your controller, which is very difficult with linear because it's a linear input curve. There'll be so much movement with the tiniest little movement of the stick. It's going to be very difficult to control. And overall, I'd say trying to pull off L2 clips at 200 meters is going to be very difficult on linear. So I don't think really linear has a significant advantage. I really say it's almost 50-50. Still, if you're a mechanically focused player, linear still totally makes sense there. But you're giving up a lot of your usage of L2 at long range. So I would maybe try both out, but if you're like me and prioritize aim over mechanics, linear just doesn't make sense because you're just going to hurt your long range aim too much, in my opinion, to make it worth it if you are focusing on aim. Moving on to your X and Y sensitivity, I'd overall say having it a little bit lower is probably going to help you if you want to use L2 aggressively, simply because you need to aim while hip firing at long range, and the lower your base sensitivity is, the easier it's going to be to hit those shots. Of course, this is really also personal preference. There's no one setting that's truly correct. You could be as low as I've seen people succeed in like 0.55 or be as high as like 0.85. Just really depends on the way you like to play. Generally though, the more L2 you use, the lower you're going to want it to be in general. But this is the type of thing, like for me, I've kept this same sensitivity for 6 years now. I'm not going to change it at this point. But if you wanted to try something out, maybe try out a little bit lower. In terms of your targeting sensitivity, I think because L2 is so powerful, you should try and set your targeting sensitivity in general higher, because if you're spamming L2 in and out, in and out, in and out like this, right, you're alternating between base, ADS. So the higher this multiplier is, the less difference there is between the two, and it'll feel more natural when L2 spamming. If you don't use a ton of L2, you might set this lower, but if you're going to use L2 aggressively, I'd actually say higher is generally going to be better. The other thing is that because at long range you're aiming while hip firing a lot, and then quickly tapping L2 and untapping, this sensitivity is not super important for long range aim as much as you think it would be if you're using L2 aggressively. So something to keep in mind. Scope sensitivity is preference because you're not really L2ing with scopes. Yes, you can pull off some L2 clips with scope DR, but really that's a non-issue. Just set it however you want. In terms of your build and edit sensitivity multipliers, definitely want these higher than 1.0. I think this depends a lot on your ping though. High ping, I'd recommend setting a bit lower. Low ping, you can afford to set it higher. I'd also say your build sensitivity should generally be higher than your edit because building you need a bit less precision than editing. So something to keep in mind there. It's preference, depending on your ping. You can just find works, but definitely set it above 1.0. You don't want to have a slowdown on your building sensitivity. Let's move on to a couple key control options. For controller specifically, the important ones, aim assist. Obviously you want that on, but edit mode aim assist is the interesting one. Edit mode aim assist I do think helps you if you're new to the game and you're trying to learn how to edit because it'll keep you within the squares. Very helpful on walls, floors, and cones, but stairs is that middle piece that you can't edit, and it's very difficult to push the crosshair through it. It like gets stuck, so that's why I don't use it. Keep that in mind. This is going to be very difficult to rotate stairs if you have this on, but I would overall say maybe use it when you're new, but once you get maybe intermediate level, consider turning it off because I think that will overall be too much of a penalty getting stuck on stairs. The other thing is Build a Pro build immediately. This is a mandatory setting. You want to only have to click once to switch build piece instead of having to double click. That's going to be a lot faster, and it's overall just going to make building way quicker. Another thing is controller edit time. This should be a redundant setting. You should be having an instant edit button. Even if you're playing with no claw, no paddles, I still think instant edit button is basically mandatory, as it's just going to make everything much snappier and faster. So we want to bindings now. In terms of controller binding, it's going to heavily depend on what configuration of controller you're running. You're either running a standard config where you have no paddles, no claw, you're running a claw config, or you're running a paddle configuration. I have a 4 paddle configuration. That's why my most important binds like switch mode, edit are on the D-pad, because all 4 paddles are bound to the D-pad, which allows you to put secondary binds like map, place marker, inventory on the face buttons, which are easier to hit. Of course, this will not make sense if you're on a claw or paddle configuration, but there are a couple tips that work for everybody no matter what configuration you use. Number 1, unbinding crouch/repair and changing it to crouch. Crouch will be more responsive because when you press the crouch button, the game will not have to check if you're holding the button, which will make it more responsive. If you need repair, you can always move that to another bind. Another thing to keep in mind is like think about certain binds like emote and like squad comms. You realistically don't need these on your controller. Put them on your keyboard if you really want to use them, but like honestly, you're going to free up some more buttons, which can be really helpful. You know, if you really want to have emote, fine, but if you're running out of buttons, you want to have a dedicated repair button, you may want to consider putting those on your keyboard and leaving them off your controller, but that's really up to you. The other thing is instant edit button. This is mandatory. You don't want to have switch mode/edit. You want to have a dedicated edit button. The most common place to put it is right here, down on the left stick. The reason why is just making it so you can press edit and instantly start your edit instead of holding and waiting, so overall much faster there. Moving on to your build controls, same rules apply as you want to have crouch instead of crouch/repair. What you want to unbind is rotate, right? I think default on down and right stick is rotate. Rotate is completely useless. I really can't think of any situations where you need rotate, so I really just say unbind that. It's just a redundant function that you don't need. You can just waterfall down. That's something you probably pick up pretty early on when you're playing. Other things, like unbind all these useless binds. In like emote picker, squad comms, replay last emote, you definitely don't need these in build mode. Maybe you could argue you want them in regular mode, but you do not need them in build mode. All that's going to do is increase the chance that you press the wrong button. If you want to emote, go back to regular mode, or better yet, use your keyboard. Moving on to edit sensitivity, or edit bindings. Same rule here, crouch instead of crouch/repair. Again, unbind all these useless functions. Like you don't need all this like map or inventory either in edit mode. You don't need to access those. Go back to regular mode if you need to access those functions. So overall, I'd say try and unbind as much redundant stuff as possible. And the other thing that can help you is setting your confirm button to be different than your edit button if you don't run edit on release, because what that will allow you to do is have a double edit bind. But for controller, I'd overall say most of you are going to want edit on release, so this is not super important. Finally, for Deadzones, I'd say for Deadzones, what you want to do is find the lowest possible setting that doesn't have stick drift, and then go from there. You might adjust it lower still, deal with some stick drift, have it be a little more responsive, or set it a little bit higher. That's up to you, but if you want a baseline point, set it all the way to minimum, and then wait, see if you have stick drift, and then slowly tick it up until you have no stick drift anymore. And with that, I hope this helps you, and I'll catch you in the next one.